Welcome to the Choose to Be podcast. Thank you all for joining our conversation today. We're excited to be with you. And I love this topic. I think this is something that comes up a lot. We're talking about how do you know the difference between if this is a trigger response, a trauma response, or is this really my gut, my intuition telling me that something's off? And first of all, I just want to validate how that can be really, really confusing and feel almost impossible to distinguish between. This isn't really going to be a long episode because, to be honest, there's really not a whole lot to dissect in this. The answer is fairly simple, and I'm air quoting because the answer itself, I think, is simple, Alana. But like we were talking about just a minute ago, it's in the practice and the journey in the practicing that does take time. So, simple answer, but that doesn't mean quick. You're not going to get here quickly when you are experiencing betrayal. And I just thought of this too. When you are in currently your environment isn't safe, when you are being triggered because you're emotionally not safe, physically not safe, that whole safety thing that we talk about, it can be really difficult, if not impossible, to access that wise femininity because you are just constantly being activated. So I think really where I want to start is just if you're trying really to figure out, is this a trigger or my wise femininity, my gut, my instinct? I think you need to go back to, am I safe? And is there safety within myself? Am I creating it in my environment, in my relationship? And maybe start there.
You're reminding me of the analogy with the fire alarm.
Yeah.
So, if you were in, like when you're little and you're in school and the fire alarm goes off, we don't stop and like run around the school to see if there's really a fire. Everyone stands up. We go outside, we figure out if it's safe and we assess for the safety. And so, when we go through something really challenging when we go through trauma, it is really normal that we have these fire alarms that did go off because there was a massive fire, right? It was safe, most safe. We needed to get out of the school. We needed to get out of that dangerous situation, retreat to safety. And it's really normal that after the major crisis is over, after we've gone through the trauma, that fire alarm keeps going off. Every tiny little bit of smoke, our brain is going, is there a fire? Is there a fire? Is there a fire? But what you made me think of as you were talking about safety is the reality is for some of our listeners, you never got out of the fire. Like
Right.
you got burned, but you are still in where there's active fires happening. So I really want to differentiate and make that clear where one is, I'll just give an example around this trauma is everything came out with my husband and all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, he's living this double life. He came forward with it. He couldn't live with it anymore. My world was rocked, but he had already done enough work on his own to get to the place that he was ready to start doing the work. And so we did take a period of separation. I got out. I got grounded enough. And then when to me it looked like there was no more active fire, trust me, there were still smoldering spots that came up for us, but there was no major active fire. Then when the fire alarm went out or went off, I could stop. I could step back out of the school, look at the situation, assess my safety, go, oh, actually, there's no fire. It's okay, body. It's okay, brain. We can move back in. The difference of that could be if you are noticing if there's this physical, spiritual, emotional safety that isn't, then it's like we're still in the school with the fire happening around us. And so I hope that analogy can really slow it down and give you something visual to help you assess your safety, which makes it easier. I'm using air quotations, easier to assess on whether this is your intuition or this is the alarm going off. That's
Yeah.
just a false alarm. But you said simple in concept. I'm like, yes, simple in concept, but confusing and complicated in practice and process.
Yeah. It really is. First of all, that was a great analogy. I think, like, spot on. I think that really helps to conceptualize what we're talking about here and the difference. And I just really, if I have a client and their partner is saying they're doing all of the right things, okay? He's working on the checklist. We're not in recovery, but hey, there's no real active fire burning in the house. That's what he's saying. And she's just trying to believe it. But she cannot emotionally regulate. She's practicing the tools. She's trying really hard to get there. She wants to believe him, but there is zero regulation in her body. That is where I would definitely, my little pink flag would fly and go, something doesn't feel right here. Because if you can't get some window of tolerance, it doesn't have to be long, but if you can't even get to that window of tolerance, then personally, I think that's a really great indicator that maybe the fire is still burning. And that's where we just came off of 4 episodes of separation. And that's where I would suggest some sort of separation so that her body can get regulated. Because really, what we're talking about, how do you notice the difference between a trauma response and my gut? You're not going to be able to figure that out if you can't get access to it. And when you're constantly activated, you're not going to know the difference. So, this is really huge. Like, it's a really big deal to get that safety. But you can't get that to know the difference if you haven't even tapped into that window of tolerance to go, oh, this is what centered feels like. Oh, this is what it feels like to breathe. This is what it feels like to feel an emotion in my body and notice the sensation in my body rather than just constantly living in a fight, flight, freeze.
It's interesting because I think about something that was confusing for me is when I would pull back and I would get that sense of safety, like I would pull out of the situation, or when we separated, I had this massive relief. And it was like, oh my gosh, I can breathe. And oh my word. And my brain went, oh, this means, and I put all of these things, and it was a wide variety of what I filled in of this means. This, this This means he's not actually safe. This means he's not doing the work. This means da 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 da. And the reality is, in my situation, he was doing the work. And I still needed that space for me to get regulated. And then once I could tap into my higher knowing and I could listen to my intuition and I could listen to my gut, then from that point, I was able to better navigate and see of like, oh, actually, there is safety being created. Now, is he perfect? Does he have all the knowledge and all the tools? Heck no, that took a long time and he's still working on it. But that gave me I was able to get enough clarity. But
Yeah.
what was interesting is initially all of the things that I put in piece of this means weren't necessarily right. So that space and time gave me the ability to sort through it. And what I realized in all of that was me pulling back and being able to assess and taking whatever time I needed for assessing what was most important to me. Because the reality is, I didn't know. And what I thought I knew or felt was still accurate. I was still in chaos and I still felt that relief from pulling back out of what was happening, but that pulling back, that getting grounded allowed me the clarity to see through the smoke, to see if there was fire or if it was leftover smoldering or what was happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like even if maybe the compulsive behavior isn't happening, then that means the other piece, the abusive behavior and communication is happening. So either way, something's happening that's impacting your ability to feel a sense of safety in your body. And so taking that step back, like you said, and recognizing what and getting clarity about what might that be. Is it the compulsive behavior still happening? I'm being lied to? Or, okay, now I'm seeing the gaslighting behavior, and that is also creating a sense of instability within me. Either way, when we're talking about how do I know the difference between a trigger or my gut instinct, I think really what we're honing in here on is you won't be able to tell the difference if you are not able to access that window of tolerance, if you're not able to get a sense of calm and emotional regulation within you. So it has to come first. I have several clients where, every session we're triggered, heightened, and we can't process. We can't figure any of those pieces out until we get this really important grounding level one, right? Piece first. So you know yourself, you know where you are, whatever's resonating with you. I think that if you're like, "Oh gosh, yeah, I'm 0 regulated, like, I don't even know how to feel my feelings, like, that's not even registering for me." Great information. Like, no judgment, no shame. That's where you start, and that's what you focus on and practice your work on with your one-on-one. So, that's just great information. Now, if you do have a sense of accessing that window of tolerance, and you can start to use those tools of recognizing your emotions. You're doing those body scans and going, okay, there's something in my chest or there's something in my gut. There's like kind of feels like spiders up my neck, or oh, I just noticed that my shoulders went up to my ears. If you're recognizing those parts of yourself, then I think now we can start talking about if that's a trauma or is this my gut?
Yes. And I just going back really quick, if you're not doing your basic level of self care, it's going to be really hard to get grounded because I have multiple clients right now. We're in summertime and it goes into schedules get off. We're taking care of a lot of additional people or things or trips. So I have a lot of clients right now where self care is just getting put by the wayside.
Yeah.
Oh, if you're not getting sleep, your body is not going to be able to regulate the same. If you're not eating meals, if you're not just doing basic self care. So I want to put that in there of just that reminder. Please check yourself. And where is your self care? I hate that question because my self care usually isn't exactly where I want it, but recognize that. And then noticing the difference between your intuition and noticing what's a fear response. For me, when I am in a trauma response, I've learned usually what my triggers look like and feel like in my body. So for me, a lot of times my triggers come with anger or annoyance or frustration. And not just in a situation, they kind of come across the board in areas that I normally don't get frustrated. Like, there was this one time I was putting dishes away and the little thing in the dishwasher would fold over. And normally it'd be like, oh, whatever, that's kind of annoying. But like, I was about to lose my crap with it. Like, I wanted to throw a glass and break it. Like, I'm so mad. But that was a sign for me. I went, what is happening? Like, what is in my body or my patience with my kids or my animals, things that normally wouldn't bother me. That to me is a signal of like, whoa, something's off. And I have learned that when I'm emotionally triggered, that's usually how it shows up for me. And you'll learn for you what looks different. But that was really big that so when I'm having those feelings and at the same time, I'm questioning everything my husband does, that to me is a signal of I need to go do more work to process. Is there something that's being unsafe that's happening? Or is there something from the past that's coming up right now? Because my alarm system is not broken. My alarm system is signaling something. And a lot of times I'm coming up on June 26th. That's my D Day.
Mm,
So the last 3 days, I have eaten sugar before bedtime, and that's not something I do. That triggers my autoimmune stuff. And this morning, I'm like, why do I keep like literally, I drank soda at 10 o'clock at last night. I don't do that. And I
No,
was
you
like,
don't.
no, I was like, why did I do that? This morning, it went, oh, we're coming up on, I did the math and it's 9 years this week. So my body, even with all the work I've done, still is like, hey, there's this day coming.
Mhm.
And so that I can register that to the past versus I can look at today and I can go, okay, he's showing up in these ways. He's talking to me in these ways. There's not the gaslighting, there's not coercion. He's emotionally connecting. He's owning his stuff. Like, and I can see my current present reality feels safe. And there's something that my body is remembering.
Yeah.
And I just want to note, like at year 9, like, yes, I'm having sugar the last 3 nights, which is literally a couple sips of sugar, a couple sips of the soda. But at year 2, there was a month of ramping up. And at year 1 and year 2, there was tears and triggers and pushing him away. So, like, sorry for those of you who are listening that 9 years, your body will still have some level of impact and it doesn't look the way it did. So if you're freaking out going, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna feel this way at year 9," not necessarily.
Yeah. No, not necessarily, but I mean, the truth is these parts, these trauma parts of the self will always be there. That's that's why forget is a load of crap. You're never going to forget. These parts will always be a part of you. But what you're doing in your healing is you're learning to get curious about them, be aware of them. And like you just so beautifully described, like you got curious, took a step back, you noticed what was happening, and it's not going to be as intense when you do those tools and practice being in charge of the parts rather than, the analogy I always give of letting them have the keys and driving the car and kicking you out. It's piping up in the back seat. It's going, "Hey, hey, I just saw something out the window. Slow down, stop." And I think there's such all to speak for me, I have learned to be grateful for those parts and not hate that they're telling me to slow down and look out the window, even when what my part thought it saw was a trigger, was something happening dangerous. I loved the opportunity to not self betray and get curious about it and stop and pause and just check in with myself. That practice alone is very empowering. And it's been, I don't even know how many years. I don't even know. I left what, 2014. So yeah, almost 10 years. Like, it still happens, and I'm remarried, and there's no acting out, and there's safety, and my body will still get triggered, and in not the best of opportune times where I feel that, "No, this something's going on," or "He's lying to me," or whatever, and when I have taken that step back and go, "You know what? Hold on a second." Like, we were full on making out, and I'm like, "Hold on a second. I need you to stop." That's that was I don't even know, like, maybe even 5 years ago, that would not have really happened. It would have been really, really hard. But I didn't self-betray. I said, "Hold on a second. I actually need to ask you about what you said earlier, because something just told me that wasn't true." And because of how he responded, how he showed up, how he answered, my body was like, "No, we're good." And I could clearly see, oh, that wasn't a present moment gut check. Something's off. That was a trauma in the back seat going, "Hey, remember that one time when da 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 da?" From my past. And I just loved, like, I felt so I think I even marked you after. I felt so, like, proud of myself. That was such a moment of that was just a big win for me.
Mhm.
To honor myself in that way, to take up space in the relationship that way and say, hold on a second, I have another question. It rebuilt trust in my marriage because of how he showed up when I said, well, hold on a second. So good things can really happen by taking the time to slow it down and recognize what just happened, what's going on in my body. Let me ask some questions.
And I know we've said this on past podcasts, but if you haven't heard it, I want to say it again or remind you of you learning to really listen to your intuition, to honor your gut, to help that, to get more in tune with that wise femininity. The more that you do that, doesn't mean that you necessarily become a human lie detector. Because that's kind of what I hoped, is that I would get to the place that then the minute he said something, I'm like, "Nope, that's true," or, "Nope, that's a lie. Yep, that's truth." And I could just instantly sort through it. And the reality is sometimes things will come up that I'm like, "I don't know. I don't know." And I'm going to just sit with this. I'm gonna get curious, but I'm also going to release having to have the answer right now, and I'm gonna put that piece of information in my pocket while I keep watching and keep assessing.
Mhm.
Because the way my brain works is it's like, I have to know now. I have to figure it out. Like, come on, gut, like, give me the answer. Let's go. And it sometimes will take a while. And sometimes I sit on something for months, and that's okay. And I think about some of you who are in this place of wondering, is he acting out? Is he still going and doing fill in the blank? And a lot of times you're not going to know because they've spent a lifetime trying to hide it. And they're very good at that process of hiding in secrecy, but just holding on to, I don't know. And I don't really feel safe. And I'm still questioning. So I'm just going to keep watching and I'm going to notice that I don't feel safe right now. And I'm going to honor that. And then with time, you might get to the place of, I recognize that was associated with this and this, and I'm going to let it go. And other times you're going to hold on to that. And then when the truth does come out, then you go, ah, see, I
Yeah.
was right and I knew it. And it's okay that I didn't have proof, but there I go. I can build some self trust that my body did know something was off.
Yeah. So I'm curious for you, do you typically feel like a trigger comes with a flood where like the pterodactyl grape, right? Just like the flooding of emotions through your body where you feel like a overwhelming that fight, flight, or even like, whoa, I just froze versus the gut instinct as like a subtle clarity, sense, quiet, inner knowing kind of thing.
I'm thinking, well, okay, so what happened in my brain is I was going to say, well, my triggers early days, it was that just like, what is happening? Or I'm not safe, or all of a sudden being really heightened in emotion and not knowing why. And so at first I was going to say, like, well, that was in the beginning, but because I've done so much work and I still can get those triggers. They don't, for me, it doesn't come on as such a, I don't have like the startle reflex. That's never really been me except in the beginning.
Mm,
That being said, the way that you just described the inner knowing, that like deeper gut sense, for me, it has been something feels off. It's been this more like quiet underneath,
yeah.
almost comfortability.
Yeah. Like
And so,
that's for me. It's like I'll even notice for me, my head will turn. I'll be like, "Mm," and it's just a very kind of subtle movement where when I get triggered, it's more of a flood. And you're right, there's a difference between like the versus, but I still will feel like a dump more than the and if you can't
yeah,
watch my body, it's probably hard to see what I'm doing, but
well, and even that, like as I've sat with clients, it's interesting watching them. And when they get information that really feels like truth, it's interesting watching their body because there'll be this, like you're doing it right now, like a super gentle nodding. There'll be kind of a little bit of a like a head moving with it, like, okay, yeah, that feels accurate. And sometimes it's almost even like a slower head nod. versus
Yes.
this like quick, though you can
Yeah.
have quicker too. But it's interesting watching bodies and then other like that head turn. I'll see women do it sometimes in session. And it's almost like this, like I'm analyzing, like, is what I'm getting like real? Is that accurate? Now, are you able to sit there with this level of being able to like analyze your body? Unless you have video cameras on you all the time, I don't know how you would do that. But I think this is why going back to this somatic body work of learning your own body and learning how it's responding and learning what movements you make and learning when your stomach is queasy or when your jaw starts to tighten. The reality is, before I started all of this work, none of that like even registered. I remember one time, I might have shared this story on the podcast, but I had my in laws in town and I was driving down the road and I was driving like an idiot. Like I was driving jerky and fast and like trying to hurry and cut in somewhere. And I remember thinking like, why am I driving like this? But hadn't the fact that I even registered why I'm driving like this, I had done it multiple times in the past, but for whatever reason that day, I was kind of embarrassed. And I questioned like, why am I driving like this? Well, now I know myself well enough that when I am really heightened, either whether I'm anxious or triggered, and family brought on a lot of anxiety for me, that I was super anxious, that my body was responding in these ways. But I know myself now to know I'm gripping the steering wheel. Oh, my stomach is really tight. Why am I clenching my jaw right now?
Yeah.
Those type of things. Now I say this like I'm like perfect at it. I'm not at all. But I know myself and I've learned to listen to my body way, way better.
Yeah. I agree. And I don't, there is no such thing as perfect, but gosh dang, if it doesn't work every single time, not only with I've seen with myself, but with clients, it really doesn't take a whole lot of practice. It's like, I just want you to know, like, even just being aware, like what you said there of like, "Oh, my hands are gripping my steering wheel." That's so huge. That is so huge, and you're making such big adjustments in your central nervous system by just that right there. Like, that might not seem like a big deal, and I just wanna validate, like, that's such a big deal. And the more you just make those tiny awarenesses and adjustments, because what you just did right there was come back to the present moment, you just realigned with the vagus nerve, right? Huge. Huge. So I love that you said that, and I just hope that everyone who's listening, you keep practicing. I promise it will get better. I promise you will get to know your body better. I see it all the time with my clients, and it's so beautiful to watch them start to make those connections, those subtle connections. And when you do, I think that's when you'll notice the difference in your own body, because we're kind of generalizing here to give you some gauge of where to go with this. But I think, like, for me, my head does turn. It is a, something just felt off. And when I go back to my past, I just shared with you an example before we hit record. When I go back to those moments where I didn't know and I can look back now with hindsight, that's what I did. I did the, or he would say something and I can see my head just turning a little bit, trying to make sense or look for truth. So I've learned that about my body. Your body might do something else very subtly when it
Oh, well, one I
knows
did,
what.
I would go, I don't want to think about that.
Mm,
That's like, that was a thought of just like, I don't want to think about that. Or I would like hurry and distract myself.
mm,
So that was one of my big coping mechanisms. And I don't like saying put my head in the sand because that to me feels shaming to who I was at the time. And I was just trying to survive and cope with a lot of really uncomfortable and not okay things that were happening. But there was this like this almost turning away of like, I don't want to look him in the eyes. I don't want to see what's happening. And so it's each of you is going to be so unique in how you are showing up and how your body is. And one thing I'll say to my clients is you are an expert in your own life. And while you may not feel like it yet, you really are. You are the one who has been with you and experienced everything you've experienced from day one, and nobody else has. Your parents didn't go to school with you. They didn't sleep next to you every single night. They weren't inside your head. They weren't inside your body. You had your own experience. So you are the expert in your life. And as you bring this awareness, you will continue to grow in that knowledge. And as you are an expert in your own body and your own experience, that's really going to help you learn to know and honor your intuition. And then also know and recognize when those are alarm signals that are going off. And then you get to assess, is this alarm accurate or is this an alarm from the past?
Yeah, yeah, I love that. You already have and have never lost your intuition, your vulnerability, and your sensitivity. But when you've experienced someone who has altered your reality and caused you to doubt your intuition or sensitivity, and it hasn't been safe to be vulnerable, then they can get out of whack. But I love knowing and reminding myself and my clients that it it is still there. That is something that you don't have to hustle for or work for. It's there within you innately already. And I think that's such a gift. And it's just, how can I access it? If it's there and I've got it, I just want to practice accessing it, not what can I do to look outside of me to get it. So,
That is beautiful. That's a great way to wrap it up. And it's funny because we said this was really short. I don't know if or I don't know how long we've been talking.
um, I don't know. You and I could just talk for hours and hours, no matter what, about a tree trunk.
You would not believe how many times Amy and I show up to record and we talk for 2 hours and never hit record. So, we did hit record today. Glad you were with us as part of this conversation. And as you go on this journey of learning to go inside and to tap into, it is this beautiful process that I hope every single human on this planet gets to do and gets to practice, and you will become better for it. So be gentle with yourself. Wherever you are at is absolutely okay. You are doing the work and just celebrate that. As always, thanks for hanging out with us today. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
You know what really helps you stay grounded, feel validated where you're at, get some learning and tools to help you? Support groups. Well, at least our support groups will absolutely help you get that healthy support you need to meet you where you're at and gently help you take those wise steps forward in your journey. Check out our group options at chooserecoveryservices.com or head over to the show notes for the link. Choosing recovery, choosing to heal, and choosing you are within reach. Let us support you in your journey. Take care, everybody.